Agricultural changes caused the Industrial Revolution. How valid is this view? The view that agricultural changes caused the Industrial Revolution has considerable validity, but is ultimately an oversimplification. While the Agricultural Revolution, roughly 1700–1850, was an essential prerequisite that removed Malthusian constraints and created key preconditions for industrial takeoff, it was neither sufficient on its own nor the most dynamic driving force. A combination of commercial agricultural factors, technological innovation, capital accumulation, energy resources, institutions, and demand-side pressures, especially from international trade, interacted to produce Britain's unique industrial transformation between c. 1750 and 1850. The Agricultural Revolution undoubtedly made a major enabling contribution. Enclosure, accelerating after 1750, with over 3,000 enclosure acts past 1,761,820. The spread of four-field crop rotation, Norfolk system, selective breeding Bakewell, and new implements dramatically raised agricultural productivity. Cereal yields roughly doubled in many areas, while output per worker increased significantly. This had three critical effects. 1. It produced a large and reliable food surplus right arrow, feeding a rapidly growing urban industrial workforce without food prices skyrocketing and triggering subsistence crises. 2. It fueled demographic growth right arrow. England's population rose from ~5 million in 1700 to ~9 million by 1801 and over 16 million by 1841. This provided both an expanding domestic market for manufactured goods and a pool of labor that could be released from the land. 3. It generated capital for investment right arrow. Many large landowners and tenant farmers accumulated profits, especially from wartime high prices 1,793, 1,815, which were channeled into industry, canals, turnpikes, and early factories. Examples include the financing of textile mills and ironworks by agricultural wealth. Moreover, enclosure and the decline of open-field farming displaced many smallholders and cottagers, creating a proletarianized rural labor force that migrated to industrial districts, the so-called push factor behind urbanization. Without these agricultural changes, the scale of urban industrial growth seen in Lancashire, the West Midlands, and South Wales would have been impossible. However, the statement is too monocausal and overstates agriculture's role in several respects. First, agricultural change was itself partly a response to commercial and industrial pressures rather than an entirely independent cause. Rising domestic and overseas demand for food and for industrial raw materials such as wool stimulated innovation in farming. Many historians now argue the direction of causation ran more strongly from proto-industrial urban growth right arrow agricultural improvement than the reverse. Second, technological breakthroughs in key industries were decisive and largely autonomous. The sequence of textile inventions, flying shuttle 1733, spinning jenny 1764, water frame 1769, mule 1779, power loom 1785, and iron steam developments, Watt's separate condenser 1769, quartz puddling 1784, high-pressure steam engines, created entirely new production possibilities. These were driven by inventive culture, scientific knowledge, and practical tinkering among mechanics and entrepreneurs rather than directly by agricultural change. Third, cheap energy from Britain's abundant and accessible coal reserves was arguably more revolutionary than agricultural advance. Coal output rose from million tons in 1770 to million tons by 1840. Steam power allowed location of industry away from water power sites and dramatically lowered production costs in textiles, iron, and transport, railways after 1830. Allen's high-wage, cheap energy framework emphasizes that Britain's unusual combination of high real wages and low energy costs incentivized labor-saving, energy-intensive machinery, a stimulus agriculture alone could not provide. Fourth, demand from international and colonial trade was crucial. The Atlantic economy, slave trade triangle, and protected markets in India, and the colonies provided massive outlets for cotton textiles, calicos, right arrow-printed cottons, and generated superprofits that were reinvested. By 1800, Britain supplied over 50% of world cotton cloth exports. Without this commercial revolution and mercantilist framework, agricultural surpluses alone would not have triggered factory-based industrialization on the scale witnessed. Finally, institutional factors: stable parliamentary government after 1688-89, patent protection, rule of law protecting property, laissez-faire attitudes, joint stock companies, and a sophisticated banking credit system created an environment uniquely favorable to risk-taking entrepreneurship. These were not products of agricultural change. In conclusion, agricultural changes were a vital precondition without which the Industrial Revolution could not have occurred on the scale and at the speed it did in Britain. They provided food, labor, population growth, and some capital. However, they did not cause the Industrial Revolution in any direct or singular sense. The revolution required the conjunction of agricultural productivity gains with independent technological creativity, cheap coal, high wages, imperial commercial demand, and permissive institutions. Therefore, the view is partly valid but substantially overstated. A more accurate judgment would be that agricultural changes were one of several necessary causes, but not the sufficient or primary cause of Britain's industrial transformation.